Question type. Listen and answer each question. 1.
One of the most important skills that an insurance company needs to have is the ability to do reliable risk assessments. An insurance company is based on the idea that they will make more money in insurance payments than they will pay out in insurance claims, right? Well, for that to work, they need to know what the chances are that something will go wrong and that they'll have to pay an insurance claim. Let's look at a fairly simple example. For those of you who moved here from the suburbs, you've probably noticed that your car insurance is much higher in the city, right? That's because the city is considered a high crime area, statistically. And I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but statistically you have a higher chance of having your car stolen, vandalized, and whatever, here than you do in the suburbs.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
For those of you who moved here from the suburbs, you've probably noticed that your car insurance is much higher in the city, right? That's because the city is considered a high crime area, statistically.
What does the professor imply? Two.
One of the most important duties of a manager is hiring. This week, we're going to talk about conducting the actual interviews. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking that this is the easy part. The people you interview got to do all the work, right? And in this way, you're like a lot of the office managers out there now. But conducting interviews is a skill that has to be developed. It's not just asking questions. You need to ask the right questions. The first step in preparing to give an interview is to think of what is needed for the job you're hiring for. I'm not talking about things like degrees. I mean, what will the person have to do in the job? Once you make a list of everything they have to do, you need to design questions.
What can be inferred about conducting interviews? Three.
To start with today, we need to discuss the difference in two major terms in economics: revenue and profit. Revenue is all the money that a company takes in over a given period, usually counted as a fiscal year. This can include both money from sales and money from new investment from outside sources. The company may sell stock, or maybe they get support from the government. Anyway, profit is what is left of that money after the company subtracts all its operating costs. And there's usually a lot. A company has to pay its employees, rent office space, pay taxes. They may need to pay for research and development. So if you are an investor, total revenue is really not that important to you. You should be much more focused on profit, because profit, that's what will determine the return you get on your investment.
What will be probably true about revenue and profit? Listen and answer each question. 4.
Today's topic is affirmative action, and before we start, I just want to remind you that we're only discussing the legal responsibilities it creates for employers. I know that many of you probably have strong feelings on this subject, but I really don't want to get into a debate about affirmative action today, okay? Good. Now, affirmative action places a minimum on the number of minorities a company must hire, and that's usually determined as a percentage of the total workforce of the company. But affirmative action can place further responsibilities on employers. For instance, an employer may be required to promote a certain number of minority employees to, make sure that the company doesn't just keep them at the bottom levels. Or the company may need to fill a top leadership position with a minority. Maybe a member of the board or something.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
I know that many of you probably have strong feelings on this subject, but I really don't want to get into a debate about affirmative action today, okay?
What does the professor imply? 5.
As you all know, your midterm is next week. Now, in your labs, you've been given review packets to help you study, so you should be well prepared, but I'm going to take a few minutes anyway to discuss what will be on the exam. The major focus will be on macroeconomics and microeconomics. You need to know the major ideas we've discussed for both. Oh, incidentally, Gordon Croft is going to be delivering a lecture on campus next week. He's one of the leading experts in the integration of micro and macroeconomics. Now, that won't specifically be on your exam, but his lecture may help clarify some concepts for you. Anyway, just thought I'd offer that up to you. So study up, make sure you cover all the material in your study packet, and if you have time, you might drop by the lecture.
What will the students probably do to prepare for the exam? Six.
When most of us hear the word bankruptcy, we think of the end of a company. But actually, this kind of bankruptcy is relatively rare, usually reserved for smaller companies. A more common form of bankruptcy is called Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Under Chapter 11, a company doesn't come to an end. That is, its assets aren't sold to pay off its debts. Instead, the company goes to bankruptcy court, where the court can decide to forgive part or all of the company's debt. Now, there are a number of advantages to Chapter 11. Number 1, many times the assets of these companies greatly exceed their debts, so selling off the company produces more money than is actually needed. Another point, these companies employ thousands of workers, so by filing under Chapter 11, those people get to keep their jobs.
What can be inferred about Chapter 11? Exercise 1. Listen and choose the best answers.
Labor movements began the same way in each country. The factory system of production led to workers being hired to work for a wage, which was just enough to sustain life. Dissatisfied with their wages and working conditions, the wage earners developed class consciousness. Class consciousness for wage earners made them aware of the common situation of all factory workers. Then they combined their efforts to secure improved working conditions and higher wages. It wouldn't be too much to say this idea of class consciousness started the labor movement. The labor movement began in England in the 1700s, when more people started to work as factory workers rather than as farmers. Especially when power machines were invented, large numbers of people were employed to operate these machines in factories. There were people who did not work in factories. However, most of them worked to produce materials needed to run factories or transport them. So, in a way, all people were factory workers, one way or the other, earning wages. Unfortunately, these wage earners barely made enough to live, so everyone in the family had to work in factories for a long time, even children. The extremely strenuous and most often dangerous work was to be in operation 24 hours a day, and workers often worked in 12 to 14-hour shifts, which came around every day. For this reason, wage earners had enough reason to join the labor movement.
1. According to the talk, what is class consciousness? Two. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Unfortunately, these wage earners barely made enough to live, so everyone in the family had to work in factories for a long time, even children. The extremely strenuous and most often dangerous work was to be in operation 24 hours a day, and workers often worked in 12 to 14-hour shifts, which came around every day.
What can be inferred about wage earners joining the labor movement? 3. Why does the professor mention power machines? Exercise 2. Listen and choose the best answers.
How has economics changed over the past 200 years? You might think that the fundamentals and laws of economics have been drafted via trial and error. It's not entirely wrong, but not entirely true either. In the past, economists were just philosophers, not specialists, who sat down and thought about how money or business might work. Also, their ideas were mostly moral. That is, they were concerned with how they thought economies should function. It wasn't truly about cash flow, supply and demand, industries, and so forth. Some might even call them amateurs, as they didn't really think about the reality of economics so much as other views. Also, banks and other financial institutions, places which we'll touch upon in the next coming months. Anyway, they didn't have a solid foundation. It didn't help that people didn't trust the banks, which didn't have insurance for robberies or any coverage in times of bankruptcy. As such, many of the fundamental economic concepts didn't really apply to the people back then. As times changed and the world developed, economics became much more scientific. Hard data became increasingly important as economics looked at market mechanisms, the impersonal scientific forces behind how money works. Professional economists appeared and more grew aware of the power of economics. Of course, more people were educated about money and the workings of financial institutions. National banks had more control of private banks and, in turn, became more secure. Many theories and cases were documented for others to study and improve on.
1. What does the professor imply about economics? Two.
What will most likely be the topic of future lectures?
3. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Hard data became increasingly important as economics looked at market mechanisms, the impersonal scientific forces behind how money works. Professional economists appeared and more grew aware of the power of economics.
What does the professor mean when he says this?
The impersonal scientific forces behind how money works.
IBT practice. Listen to part of a lecture in a business class. The professor is talking about customer service.
You know, businesses spend an awful lot of money on marketing and advertising.
And why do they do it? Well, of course, to get customers. But for far too many businesses, this is where it all ends. I mean, once they get the customer, they act as if the customer will be theirs for life. But in the real world, it's just not that easy. Once you get a customer, nowadays, you've got to make an effort to keep that customer, and that's where customer service comes in. So let's suppose you get a customer. What is it that may make you lose that customer? Well, probably the first reason customers may leave is that they are lured away by your competition. It's your job as a manager to find out what the competition did to attract their attention. Was it lower prices, better service, or something else that you never considered? No customer will continue to be loyal if they are not made to feel special. What is it that you can do to make customers feel special and thereby increase their feelings of loyalty? With all the talk about advertising and marketing campaigns, we, as business people, tend to forget that a majority of our clients are referred to us by other customers. Customers who were satisfied by what we did for them. This word-of-mouth kind of advertising is often neglected, but can account for a large number of your customers. This is why it is so important to nurture the relationships with the customers that you already have. Who knows how many new customers they may be able to make for you? Perhaps they are the best advertising you can ever get. Let me give you a few statistics that may help to prove my point. First of all, repeat customers spend 33% more than new customers. Second is customer referral. I mean sales resulting from people who've recommended you to others are 107% higher among current customers than among people who have never been your customers. And finally, but something I think it's vitally important to remember, it takes 6 times more money to sell a product or service to a possible customer than to a current customer. So I guess what I want to say is that customer service in the long run is going to make you money. Some research has found that you can increase your profits by 50% simply by taking good care of your current customers. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Now, there are many techniques you can use to keep your current customers happy. They can be offered special discounts. They can be interviewed to find out what it is they like and what it is that can be improved. Perhaps special sales and promotions can be used to show them appreciation. This is where you can use your creative marketing skills. Sure, all businesses grow by attracting new customers. But don't forget the old proverb, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 1. What is the talk mainly about? Two. What does the professor say is the main reason for losing current customers? 3. According to the professor, what can be the main result of good customer service? 4. Why does the professor say this?
Do you see what I'm getting at here?
5. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Sure, all businesses grow by attracting new customers. But don't forget the old proverb, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
What does the professor mean when he says this?
But don't forget the old proverb, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.